you with no one's help. I ask myself, why this wealth you always name is never common. Find another way. So I turn to you, the ones that said you always rule.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this very special Q&A session with Zena Edwards. I'm Farah Ahmed from Julie's Bicycle, and I'm really excited about the conversation today. So just a few housekeeping points before we get into the session. Today's session will be recorded, so your microphones and videos have been turned off. Please use the chat function for any questions that you have. So we'll be coming to them throughout the session. So don't wait until the end. Please feel free to just fire away. We are live captioning this event, and the captions can be found at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and they're marked as CC. So please do use that if you need them. And if you have any technical difficulties, we've got Daisy Hale on hand to help resolve them. Please use the chat function to flag any issues and select Daisy Hale or all panelists. Otherwise, the messages will default and get sent to everybody. And please join in the conversation on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtag Season for Change. And you can follow us on Twitter at @jointheseason_. So a little bit about Season for Change and Season for Exchange before I hand over to Alison and Zena. So Season for Exchange is a precursor to the Season for Change program. It's a 3-week free program with online workshops, conversations, and artists' interventions to inspire artists and arts professionals to learn, share knowledge, and talk about climate action and climate justice. The project is led by Arts Admin and Julie's Bicycle and is delivered in collaboration with partners nationwide and supported by Arts Council England and the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. So that's enough from me for the moment. I'm going to hand over to Alison Tickell, who is the director of Julie's Bicycle, and to Zena Edwards.
Thank you very much, Farah, and welcome, Zena. So just before we start, I just thought, first of all, for those of you who weren't with us last week, just a few words about Zena. If you haven't intimately connected with her already, just a little bit of biog. She's a writer, performance poet, singer, radical arts educator, and creative director of Verse in Dialogue, an arts and public engagement organisation dedicated to championing the arts for positive change. Raised in Tottenham in North London, Zena now lives in South London. We learned that last week. And as a poet, she's travelled really extensively around the UK, the US, Africa, Europe, collaborating with really great artists and award-winning visual artists, Theatre Gates, Hugh Masekela, Last Poets, Baba Mars, some really great people that she's been working with. Shared the stage and anthologies with people like Linton Kwesi Johnson, Sonia Sanchez, Lem Sisse, Jean Binta Breeze, Roger McGough, etc. And as a live performance director, Zena was the first woman director at Redbridge Arts, collaborating with rising star choreographer Votive Siva, and devised and directed Climate of Fear. As part of Season for Change, Zena will be working with Apples and Snakes on a new commission for 2020-21. And all of that amazing experience, plus what she brought last week, is why we're so happy to not just have her here now, but to have her back. Last week, for those of you who weren't with us, and I hope some of you who were, this will resonate with you. Zena took us all on a quite extraordinary journey with the acute and incredibly expressed insights through the living manifestations of white supremacist culture, both past and present, to what might it be were we able to live in reciprocal appreciation to one another, to ourselves, and to Mother Earth. In other words, what does it take to decolonize and move into love? And the experience for me is, I know that reading some of the feedback and talking to people after the event, including Zena, the experience for me was incredible. Zena managed to do something really exceptional, which was to speak consistently to truth, to take us all on that journey with her in a context of real compassion, empathy, but also in the gritty reality of her life and her experience and the experience of so many others, to a place of real art. Actually, it was in this Zoom infested world, having that moment where we could actually just experience the power of an extraordinary poet speaking two truths in that context was really exceptional. And like so many of these digital experiences, it finished far too abruptly. And there was a longing at the end of it just to be in this space. And Zena has really generously agreed to come back and share that space with us again. This really is about questions coming from you. I've got some initial prompts, but I'm sure that it won't take long for everybody else to really start moving. So the very first question is really how you, Zena, approached this piece, and to sort of highlight that provocation, that lovely provocation you kept on returning to all the way through, about the concept of the keynote. Is it about the hard facts, or is it about the feelings that we inhabit?
Yeah. To be honest, I was getting quite traumatized by the idea of doing a keynote speech, because in the actual speech itself, which I would rather call a sharing or an offering or a proposition, or just a sharing of my experience, trying to approach it to sound as if I have the gravitas of people who I respected, like Toni Morrison and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Brené Brown. These are people who are like steeped in this practice of sharing through their crafts, and I am as well. But I think the reality, and I'm going to really speak very frankly, the reality is my experience of being in the arts in the UK has been quite a diminishing one. And sometimes the way that colonialism works, you can end up internalizing some of that diminishing idea of who you are, because the actual narrative that's pushed out there is so insidious and potent. So I was having that sort of imposter syndrome thing happening, but then I realized that for, most of my life, I have been struggling for space to be able to speak about the things that I want to speak about, and feel that I have a voice that has value and has a position and deserves to be listened to. And which is one of the reasons why the work that I do is all about encouraging young people to step into their power, step into their voice, exercise it, and to see themselves as global citizens who have a right to speak up and have space to speak about things that they feel strongly about, particularly if they're going to be people who are going to be part of changing the way that we operate, the way that we interact, the way that we have faith in each other and love each other and connect with each other. So actually approaching the keynote speech, I can speak to a few of my friends. It's like they were throwing all this information at me about colonial history and politics and geopolitical things. I'm like, I can't retain all this information. What I can do is speak from my truth.
Yeah.
And then I started to think about all the people who had actually given me all this information. And I'm like, these are just folks on the street. These are people who work hard in the industry, jobbing artists, people who run organizations who really put their nose to the grind to think about how they can be really inclusive. So I decided I was going to call their names rather than quote Brené Brown and Toni Morrison. As much as I love them, I thought, no, I'm gonna call on the people who I know are the street prophets, people who are making changes, who are affecting changes and have deep resonance on the ground right here, who I know. And I realized that that's the knowledge that we should also be accessing as well.
Great, which is a really beautiful segue into hearing a little bit of that how you interpreted the keynote, and I'm just going to turn my camera off.
Okay. All right. So the actual keynote did begin with a film called Blind Spots, which was a film that I was asked to commission to make for a organization that were doing a film called Virtual Migrants. And Blind Spot was definitely talking about privilege's blind spot when it comes to the climate justice and environmental justice movement. And we're not going to show that today, but please do take a look at it. You can find it on YouTube. Okay. Here, 31 weeks into lockdown, I sit in my front room on my couch where I let it all hang out after a hard day's graft in the arts and culture sector in the UK. There is none of the regalia, no glass prismatic lectern with a stick insect microphone or a red dot of a TED Talk floor mat and a massive screen with a slick slideshow or beautifully ambient purple gold twilight lighting that casts photographic halos about my skin. Today I sit in my house looking at that cobweb in the corner, a cup and a plate in my sink, a boiler that is on the brink of kaput, at the fridge that is not full of leafy green veggies I would like it to contain right now. And I think about the expectations upon me to deliver words that might give answers for how we address inclusivity in the climate justice movement. The word inclusivity troubles me though, as does the word diversity, as both words have exclusivity implicit within them, as if I'm being allowed to join a private members club that has rules and ways of being embedded in its ethos. And if you do not follow those rules, you will experience a plethora of shades of resistance to the changes you were invited in to initiate. And it can go deep, because those same shades of resistance can vary in intensity depending where on the spectrum of hue of a black and brown person's skin lays, to the potency of the truth they bring into the room. Some of my experiences have included interactions with career activists to agent provocateurs, and in real time, those incidences have been less than pleasant, and at worst, a toxic rude awakening to how power sought after is power sought anywhere. These spaces, organizations, campaigns, and movements all had one thing in common though: their operational structures, how they ran business, how mobilization or organization was implemented. More on that later though. I was as horrified as everyone else to watch the lynching of George Floyd and find out about the reckless abandon of the trigger happiness which killed Breonna Taylor. My inbox has not stopped buzzing since. Offers to speak, to perform for a hashtag have been abundant. And believe me, the jobbing artist in me is ecstatic. However, the activist in me asks, why this and why now? And a complex set of emotions have paid a visit and sat here with me on this couch and attempted to reason with resentment, who took up a lot of airtime. Oh, it was all clearer before, wasn't it? When it was just about diversity quotas, rehashing diversity policy, throw some money at representation and have distracting conversation about who gets the money when there's reparations. And then epithets hailing the exploits of colonial looters fell, and it all got a little bit serious. So you do give a damn about ancestry, just not anyone else's. Now I can hear folks saying, but you can't blame more white people for what their ancestors did. It's 2020. You're a Black artist being offered a gig. Yes, I am. But I'm also a human being going through some extraordinary emotions with my own shadow work as colonial trauma is upturned, picked over, prodded, poked, and stared at. So I say this with the love for the human project. I don't have room to hold the enormity of awe, for the surge of outrage, for the burning conviction for change in whiteness, its panic buying of absolution from its rotten past in this generation's lifespan, for the roaring hunger for knowledge about how whiteness can help, The mainstream is noisy AF, demanding attention to be paid to racism's existence with the same intensity levels as high as its rejection of British racism just the day before. Black folks haven't had this much attention since the Civil Rights Movement, and that was in America. The phenomena of being Black in the UK never got this much coverage in this shape before, and it needs to be understood. It still equates to white noise, to pressure. I also needed to keep up with the demand of young voices suddenly wanting intergenerational support and understanding, wisdom that points the way in 2020, while alone, I tried to nurse the wounds inflicted since the 80s, re-exposed in 2020. I am only human, and I give thanks that I'm able to be here, to have space to feel when my ancestors didn't. They were not afforded that kind of humanity. I have needed to sit quietly and watch the insurrections, hear the wall of sound of misinformation, disinformation, and it's been a lot. And there's a need to gather thoughts and let the hum of this enormous roiling energy that hit me like a truck of change subside. I've had to ask for space to do the breathing people were out there marching for. All I can say is that I have to give context to the sensitivities that exist within. Going into activist spaces with inclusion on the agenda, that there is a human spirit, feeling packaged in a melanated skin. So I wonder what kind of expectations people attending this event will have of me, a simple working class Black girl from Tottenham, the single parent from a Windrush generation mother who lost all contact with her own mother, aged 4, coming here with her father, an economic migrant, a British subject, here to restore a debt-riddled UK after a second European war. They really had nothing to do with anyone else. They got dragged in by colonial proxy. The result, a fracturing of families from the Caribbean when it wasn't considered important enough to document and monitor the descendants of slaves with efficiency. So I am invited to write a keynote speech about a planet fighting for personhood. I think I've had to edit this quite heavily because I didn't want to do the whole keynote speak. Okay. I'm a Black working class girl from Tottenham who has an almighty, overwhelming love for this rock floating in Black space between Venus and Mars, the goddess of love and the god of war, a sentient orb forever and graciously abundant, feeding us, putting clothes on our back, giving us space to play and speculate on what this existence is really for. This living, breathing organism generously encouraging and guiding us to grow, to develop and learn about who we are, and that our very existence is a lesson in its own right, without there having to be an outcome. Just general contentedness of just being. And importantly, giving us flashes of color, clashes of excitement, booms of thunder, caressing us with winds of how our own well-being and mental health and our happiness is connected to our relationship to everything. Not just to our immediate family or friends or localized community, but to the wider environment, what we see around us in terms of the structures that we build, the spaces that we leave for breath that is clean, not tainted by the toxicity of a greedy grab of cubic airspace bought by billionaires and corporate moguls who want beautiful views of London for their luxury apartments on expensive roads, while those without homes die as collateral on the same streets where we lay so many bouquets. They pave the roads as meadows of shrines, as disenfranchised youths living in the same margins of scripts that I grew up in, written by parliamentary whips, handling MP business, sliding fat envelopes across tables with special handshakes and winks. Now, during this pandemic, we cannot touch. Instead, people express their love through bandwidth from the chest up. They wipe their eyes from the saline blur of disappointment that we could have done better. If only the crisis was not a reflection of the normal we were complicit in upholding. A crisis the global South have endured for centuries. And I visualize all the indigenous rights movement in their gratitude rituals, holding fast to their dissent and ritualizing resistance, refusing to be undermined or removed from their sovereignty, their agency. So I ask the question, whose emergency is this? Who is in crisis? Whose crisis are we talking about here? And what does the climate activist have to look like to be included in the movement? As I draw this speech to a close, I want to quote the people I know. I need to do a roll call of people I know doing the work. KMT, a hip hop gardener whose blossoming community gardening and educational project was founded in honor of his mother who was bipolar. May Project Garden is what an environmental climate justice activist space looks like. Brixton Kitchen that cooks with vegetables grown in gardens behind terraced houses in the not so nice parts of town. I want to quote Serena Solanke, who introduced me to the idea of any movement should be moving at the speed of trust to strengthen its culturally straining dynamics with the movement. Jeffrey Chambers, an incredible artist and clever brain who noted that the concept of race is ontological. It relies on the Black and brown body to be objectified, to be dehumanized and consumed because the resourcism is real. I want to call in Lisa Mead, who introduced me to the idea of the master colonial blueprint of business by which any operational workings of administration and organization in the Western world to date was created by the brutal gangsterism of the East India Company of Britain. I always speak about America being the belly of the beast. It is pure appetite. But for me, Britain is the brain. I want to quote my friend Marcy, who always tells me everything is shanty, shanty man. I want to quote a young man I am mentoring named Moses, estranged from his home in Zimbabwe, a refugee living in the deep outskirts of London, the only Black person in his residential home, who said, and I quote, "Rejection is not a loss, it is a redirection into something new. And as the earth rejects us for our childish ways, we will become wise to a new direction, new consciousness," as she points us to the rivers that break their banks in the west of England, when 3 months of rain falls in 6 minutes in Senegal. May the dizziness and vomiting from the greenhouse gases and fumes caused by the drag lines in the tar sands scraping the skin of indigenous sacred lands of First Nation peoples in Canada. When fracking, just the word alone implies the level of violence the earth must endure. Fracking for shale gas causing tremors that shakes gas into the taps of homes in Yorkshire and Lancashire, while the waters in Flint plant seeds of tumours under the skins of Black children. And the lungs of Caribbean 9-year-olds in South London fill with pollutant microbes so small that the chlorophyll of trees cannot cleanse them. They are all taking on the spirit of weeping willows. The nuance of change is profound. You cannot change the world and not expect to change yourself. Personal revolution equals collective transformation. And I say all of this to give context to the sensitivities that exist within when I'm going into activist spaces with inclusion on the agenda, that there is a human spirit feeling packaged in a melanin skin. Decolonization is about relationships based on visible and active respect. It is about mutual exchange and reciprocal appreciation, not just functional transactions for individual gain. It is Ubuntu, I am because you are. The interconnection relies upon consciousness and a movement and a moment informed by self-awareness. I'm going to stop there because there is more, but I really would love to just talk to people.
Thank you so much, Zena. There's so much in there that it's almost, it's the challenge is responding to it with kind of the same kind of a sense as you. But there's just a couple of things that we talked about which feel really important. You talk about the legacy of the East India Company, how its omnipresence is built into how we work now, and that's not just in the sort of obvious industrial context, but how we work on a day-to-day basis, all of us, that the output-oriented, exploitative, busy progress culture, which is based on extraction as surely as the East India Company extracted labour and land. And I just wonder how, how you experience that and how you respond to it.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because it's one of those situations where you receive an email, and it's asking a lot of you, and it wants it like yesterday. And it's really can be a struggle because you find yourself as an artist, you know, particularly as a marginalized, you know, artist, a black artist. I'm a poet, you know, it's a very niche industry, and you're juggling lots of things to pay your bills and pay your mortgage. And when you receive an email demanding all this information, and they want it now, you're like, well, I don't have that at hand right now, and I've got to slot this into my other busy work that I'm trying to do. And sometimes the language within the email it can be double-edged. It's really hard to explain. Like there's a classic example, and where I was asked to do some work to give my expertise of my 25 years worth of experience, and to be paid £50 for it, to do this work. And that's intellectual property. That's my intellectual property. And that's also property that comes through a lived experience, which can be quite traumatic. When I talk about May Project Gardens, for example, May Project Gardens came about because it was the experience of mental health of a Black woman. And I use that as an example because activism was born out of that. An activist space was born out of a real life experience of somebody's mental health, and how a garden was what kept her balanced. And those kinds of considerations is that this machine itself challenges our mental health all of the time because it is so demanding. The East India Company was all about profit, how it could benefit from profit. It brought in the system of the stock exchange where you could do the bidding. That's what the stock exchanges is about now. So everything, like you said, it's profit driven, it's outcome driven. And I think we have to make space, breathing space, to allow people to process, like I've just did. That breath that I took, that's a real pause that I needed to process. And oftentimes we don't have that opportunity. Literally, just like you just get bombarded sometimes. Yeah,
and the overwhelming sense of going against the norm. You know, you speak really powerfully about breathing, which has got obvious, very powerful contemporary resonances, but also has something really fundamental about it. The idea of breath actually being the life force, and we don't, the moving against that as a cultural norm so that we actually do make space to breathe is very counterintuitive. It is not encouraged, which is again part of that sort of historical approach to an outcome driven extractive and a justification of that extractive sort of cultural norm. I also just wanted to sort of invite you to talk a bit about your mum, because you talk about gardens all the way through, and your mother, a Windrush generation woman, taken from her own community and culture, and how gardening and creating through that experience of the earth, what kind of restorative and regenerative elements it brought into her life, and obviously also into yours.
Well, I think the whole thing of gardening is that direct connection to the earth. If you live in an urban environment, and your education, starting from the age of 4, it's such a formative time, is about producing. It's not about connecting yourself to nature. It's about the STEM subjects. It's about living from here up.
Mm.
When your body is an antenna in its own right,
Mm.
picks up all of this incredible information that the earth can give you about being human. And I think that's the most important part about what I'm trying to express as well, is that we are of this earth. It is itself a breathing thing. We see that in the way that the climate works. There's some incredible animated images that you can see online of the earth actually breathing. You can see it in terms of the way the climate works. It's incredible. So I think if we consider ourselves to be connected to there's creatures living on us as well, even symbiotically in our gut, that billions and billions of like organisms that we are made up of, and we are part of this planet as well as an organism. So I think the need to be connected to the earth isn't just about to be gardening isn't just about growing your food or having nice flowers or having somewhere you can sit and have a drink and have a picnic or whatever. People, the marginalized groups, don't have gardens, but they can still have access to the earth if they're encouraged to have plants on their balconies, for example, or at least in policy, when it comes to the gentrification is incredibly violent. It builds on all the green spaces that are available. That's why it feels like there's a constant land grab. And I mentioned that in the speech, where I say there are people who are buying up land from Arabia, Nigeria, China. They're buying up land and they are building on properties and they're sitting empty. And these spaces are needed for young people to have an opportunity to experience the earth, just to have space. If you live in what I call rat runs on some of these estates, you only see the world this way, as narrow as this. If you can't see a horizon, you don't think in a way that is expansive. So for me, the importance of gardens is about feeling the earth underneath your feet, feeling the knowledge that comes from the earth, just vibrationally, and understanding that the body is an antenna, that intuitively there is knowledge available to us if we allow ourselves to be connected to the earth.
Yeah, and it's that ability you have to connect the huge, the planetary, to the sort of grains of earth beneath your feet, which resonates throughout the piece. That sort of looking at things in a really big frame and seeing all the parallels on how actually everything actually is the same, just on different scales, and the same questions, the same solutions. Everything is very fractal. It all mirrors everything else. There's been a few things coming up, and I'll just read. First of all, there's a comment. Thank you very much. Sorry, peering at the screen. Interesting, here in Ireland, there's been a major legacy of Africa having been represented as the recipient of charity when it has been the source of exploited resources quite massively. I was just thinking about the comment about exploitation. And that's from, sorry.
Yeah, Stephen, are we talking about?
Yeah, I think that's Stephen. Sorry, Maya. And thank you for that. There's also remembering this book review in the Guardian. There's a nice link there.
Can I just comment actually on what Stephen has said there? Yeah, I mean, I think understanding the legacy of colonialism anyway, like France would fall apart if Senegal really got economic independence, because they're basically still paying reparations from the slave owners that were there. They're paying them. It's almost like an insurance. It's the same with Haiti. The reason why Haiti can't get back on its feet is because it's paying back the slave, which would be Lloyd's, I think Lloyd's Bank, paying them back because they fought for their freedom and they have to pay for it. They're still, their descendants are still paying for it now. So, and what shocked me, I went into a school in Canvey Island one time, 2 schools in Canvey Island. And the children there, they're 13, 14 years old, and they don't know that there are cities in Africa. And I asked them, do you still think there are cities in Africa? There are any cities? They said, no, it's just children with flies in their eyes and pot bellies. And I said, you guys have got all of these laptops and iPads sitting here. You need to go and do some Googling. And I said, firstly, do you think that the way that they represent you, young people, in the media is fair? And they said, no, they tell lies about us. I said, well, if they tell lies about you, do you think they could possibly be telling lies about Africa? So for me, it's about how we are educating our young people.
Yeah.
Because if people still think that in Africa it's just poverty, I mean, my mind is boggled by that.
Yeah.
So I just really, so thank you for bringing that up, Stephen, because it's ridiculous. And when I talk about the resourcism is it's kind of related to the Christian idea of the garden, that the planet is the garden from which we take what we want as a resource. But it's been so twisted and distorted that instead of us being keepers of the garden, we actually take everything that we can, and it's become gluttonous. But it also meant that people who were on the land were also considered a resource. It was only in 1969 that in Australia, the native peoples there, the native indigenous people, the Aboriginals, were considered fauna, part of the flora and fauna. And that was only in 1969 that the law was changed. So, you know, it's in our lifetime that a lot of this, and I want to call it obnoxious, these obnoxious attitude towards the planet and towards other human beings of different skin tones, because that's all it boils down to, are considered, you know, less than.
Yeah. And those assumptions are still so alive and present, as we're seeing all over the world today, with an extension to the natural world as well, what we call the natural world. There's a nice comment here from Lisa Mead, who wants to flag that she heard about the East India Company through a workshop with, of course, Sour Lemons, great company. So a couple more comments. Just an affirmation of meeting people at workshops who said the same. Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu about Aboriginal culture is very good. And then Farah would like to specifically ask a question. Farah, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello. You do a lot of work with young people, and you talked about in your speech lots of young people who are starting to come into contact with climate justice and wanting this intergenerational dialogue, and you feeling like you don't have that gravity or that weight behind you sometimes. How do you lead? What does that look like in a climate justice space, especially as you know, people of color and people who have been marginalized, have historical solutions, have been fighting throughout history against these huge extractive systems? How do you talk to young people about that and maintain that compassion?
Okay, so it's an interesting question. I basically find myself having to get them to understand the relevance of the long arm of colonialism, how far it reaches into their homes, how it reaches into their culture and their ideas about who they are themselves. So I start with allowing them space to release, because a lot of them are holding so much tension. They're holding a lot of fear, anxiety, self-doubt, you know, and it breaks my heart to see them feel so unsure of themselves, because it also makes them susceptible to outrage culture, susceptible to criticism through social media. They take it on board. So for me, I start with them as human beings. Like, give them validation, like everything that you feel, everything that you are not normal, that's a bad word, are the right experience, the right feelings under extraordinary circumstances. Okay, these are extraordinary circumstances that we're in right now. And then they're a normal human response to pressure, the way that it comes at them. So I tend to start with them. And then I try to give them context as to why climate change and the reason why I do funny is because the climate's going to change anyway. We're just precipitating it. The planet will be fine. If we aren't here, it will be fine. It's how we're managing to stay here and alive on the planet as a species that's important. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about. I think when people are talking about saving the planet, it's the wrong perspective. We have to save ourselves. So to give them context about why climate change is important, I shift the lens and I talk about environmental justice. So their direct communities, how they can affect their community directly is by understanding how colonialism works, how oppressions work. And I have to give them a content. So for example, when I directed the theatre play, Climate of Change for 8 young people who were doing some monologues for a festival called the Flying Solo Festival. They were all aspiring actors from different backgrounds in terms of class and race. They'd never written poetry before. They'd never written their own stuff before. They'd never engaged with climate issues before. So I had to approach it from a story. So I tell stories. And one of them I said was, they had some issues in their community about immigration, because this was at the height of the kind of Brexit campaign as well. And I said, you've got a young Syrian boy who wants to earn some money. He's from a rural area and he wants to earn some money so that he can give to his family, to feed his family. He can't because the land is dried up due to climate change. So he tries to make his way into the city. And in the city has been bombed out by the NATO forces, which is America, France, and England, and a few others combined. They bombed the city out. So he has to go into a refugee status and he finds his way to the UK, onto the streets of UK. And there he is trying to find a status. He's disconnected from his land, disconnected from his family, disconnected from his culture, and he's trying to find a place. When all he wanted to do was make some change, have some money to give to his family, maybe to have something himself. And don't you want to be doing that? Isn't that something you want to be doing as a young person? You want to earn your own money. You want to buy yourself some nice things, maybe give some money to your family. And once I was able to draw the parallel, they could see themselves. And I think this is the whole point. I work in a way where I'm saying, this is a human project on this planet. This is humanity trying to work together on this planet. And the role of this system that we live under, patriarchy and white supremacy, capitalism, consumerism, relies on us casting judgment on others, on each other, cultivating shame and guilt, and an attitude of, and that's a culture of blame, the blame culture. Underneath all of that is people so disconnected from their true power. You know, we are so powerful. Sometimes it blows my mind. We are so powerful as individuals. And then we look to our little cuddly fairy creatures, our pets, and we love them because we feel what love feels like. It's powerful. We look at the animal kingdom, we're overawed by it. Like, why can't we be in awe of ourselves? You know, I don't believe we're all bad. I don't believe we're born in sin. I don't believe we're born greedy and terrible. We're not, you know, and this is why we look at children and the innocence of children. So I often talk about with our young people, return to your innocence when you're free of guilt, free of blame, free of shame, free of judgment. What does that feel like? And then I get them to write from there. You're muted, Alison.
You'd think I'd know by now, didn't you? It's a really universal appeal that you're asking of all of us, which is to connect, to feel the world, to listen to oneself and connect more broadly out there. And I think, excruciatingly, I think we're running out of